Hello fellow Unreal Engine games developers. In our continuing desert driving game series, we're going to add random sandstorms, which will limit the visibility for our players and make it trickier for them to find the gates. Let's get straight into it. Welcome back to the desert driving game series. The playlist for the episode so far is in the description below if you want to catch up. So today we're going to create a sandstorm effect. I tried various different methods of achieving this with particle systems, but the problem with particles is that you're going at various different speeds and the effect changes depending on whether you're static or moving at high velocity, and it didn't really sell the effect for me. So I ended up with a much simpler approach using the exponential height fog, and in fact this works very well. It gives me the lack of visibility that you'd have in a sandstorm. So that's what we'll do today. We'll implement it, and we'll also get the game to effectively enact the fog at random periods through the game. So you'll have different visibility at different times to see the gates. So let's get started by creating the fog, and we're going to use the exponential height fog component. Drag it into your scene, and let's just put it in the environment folder there with cloud and atmosphere. And you can see straight away that it's added this lack of visibility around the whole desert. So we'll be adjusting the strength of that in a minute. But one thing we need to do is we need to change the fog so it's not luminous. At the moment, if you look at the fog components, they've got sort of white, blue colors and just highlighted colors. And if I go into the play mode, you can see that the vehicle has a sort of an eerie glow on it. Now, I don't want my fog to actually cast any light. I just want it to look like there are sand particles in the air preventing you from seeing. So let's come out of this and let's start to change settings on the fog. So first of all, we're not going to be using in scattering texture, so you can collapse that. And what we'll do is we'll change the in scattering color to black. And you'll see straight away that it now looks like a fog with no light attached to it. And similarly, we'll go down to the directional in scattering and we'll change that to black as well. And straight away we can see the desert with a little mist in it. So actually what we'll do is we'll leave the density in the game at 0.01, so it just creates a little bit of sort of a misty effect on the canyon walls. But then what we want to do is we want the game to up this density to between 0 and a fixed amount, say 1. Too much. So you can see that at 1 you can only see the next dune. So we want to get the game to control this density amount, and we'll randomize the density as well so that it has different densities during the game. Let's put it back to 0.01, and let's start off by putting it into the player controller just to test it out. So let's go to the player controller. So open up your player folder, open up your player controller, and we want to put it in the, first of all we want to get a reference to the height fog at the start of the game. So in the begin play section, go towards the end of it, and after the set input mode game only, to get actor of class, going to be exponential height fog. We'll only have one actor in the level with this type, and then we can promote this to a variable, and we'll call this sandstorm fog. Okay, so that's our, now we've got our reference which we can use. And just to test it out, what we'll do is we'll put in, we'll do it so that if you press the F key, it switches the fog on and off. So let's build it up in parts, see how it works, and then we'll put it in the game mode so that it happens at random periods. So create a custom event, actually not custom event, create input, keyboard F key. So when we press the F key, I'm going to set the density of this fog. So get this fog component, control, drag it in, and then you drag off here and do set density, set fog density. We'll get the light fog component and set the density to a particular amount. So we want to flip-flop in this example between it being maximum density and then going back to the original density. So let's add a flip-flop node here. So the first time we press it, we'll set the density to 1. And the second time we press it, fog density, and we'll set it back to 0.01. Okay, so that should toggle between the two. So let's give this a go. Just do it on a single layer at the moment. Okay, so I press F, instant fog or sandstorm, and press F again and it goes off. So that's a good start, but in reality I don't want it to be like a light switch going on and off. I want it to roll in and roll away again when it's finished. So in order to have that effect happening over time, we can use a timeline component. So let's move these over a bit. Right, let's just get rid of the second one. We probably won't need that anymore. And what we'll do here is we'll create a timeline. Right, timeline, add timeline, and we'll call this timeline Sandstorm rolling in. Double click to edit it. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a float for the density. We'll call this fog density. And we're going to make this a 1 second timeline. Double click to create 2 points. Shift click to create 2 points. And in the first one, make the time 0 and the value 0. And the second one, time is 1 second and the value is 1. Press this to fit it in, and you can right click on the curve and make it auto so it's a smoother transition from one to the other. So that will go from 0 density to 1 density. Let's come back to the graph. And now we'll attach the flip-flop to play. And the update to set the fog density, and we'll take the fog density value here. And now when we press the F key the second time, reverse that, and effectively it'll play this backwards going from density of 1 to 0. Let's compile and save. Give that a go. So if I press the F key, you can see that it transitions from no fog to complete fog, and if I press it again, it fades out. So that's the effect we're after. Next thing we want to do is we want to maybe change the value of that fog density. So at the moment it's fixed, it goes between 0 and 1. So what we can do is we can add in a lerp here. So we'll use this timeline to control the playing from start to nothing to full density, but then we'll put a lerp in to control the effect that density has. So put in lerp float here, and we're going to now use the fog density as the alpha to control this lerp. And we're going to go from 0.01, that's where we want it to start, and for it to return to remember with a little bit of fog. And then the amount here will be the density we want. So we might not want go to full density, we might just want to go to half density, 0.5. So let's put that in. In a second, we'll make this a variable so we can have different densities every time it starts. So compile, save, go into play mode. Okay, and if I press the F key, it goes to 0.5, which to be fair is not much different. The one, it's still pretty dense, and then I press F again, it goes out. Still works as before. So the next thing we want to do is we want to take the control away from the player. We don't want the player to be able to press keys and have fog, and in any case this is only going to do the fog on their local game instance, not on everybody else's client. So we want to synchronize that between all the connected players. So let's remove this and the flip-flop, and what we'll do now is we'll create a custom event. We'll call this client toggle sandstorm. And on this toggle sandstorm we'll have a switch, say sandstorm switch boolean, and put in a branch with B. Drag in that sandstorm switch, and what I'm going to do now is if the sandstorm switch is on, meaning we want to put the sandstorm on, we will play, and if it's false, we want to switch the sandstorm off, we'll reverse. Same as before, except it's now going to be controlled by the game. And I also want to have another parameter for the strength, because in the game mode I'll randomize the strength. So let's add in another input, and we'll call this fog density. Float, and we'll plug this into the lerp. So the timeline will now go between 0 or 0.01 and the random fog density amount dictated to by the game mode. Okay, so that's all we need to do probably in the player controller. Now what we need to do is get our game mode to tell the clients to switch that sandstorm on and off. So go back to the main map, go to your game mode, pick up game mode, and open it up. And what we'll do now is we'll create somewhere in here, top, we'll create a new function, custom event, not function, sorry, new event, and I'm going to call it initialize I'm going to call this at the beginning of the game. I'm going to start potentially having sandstorms, and what I'll do is I will create another event. Show you why I'll do this in a second. Call start. Let's do toggle sandstorm. And what I'll do now is when we call the initialize sandstorm, I will set a timer by event. And for now, I'm going to have it happening every 5 seconds and attach this event handle to the sandstorm toggle and get it looping. So what this means is that this initialize sandstorm will call this toggle sandstorm event every 5 seconds. And in there, we'll decide whether to switch on the sandstorm, switch off the sandstorm, and we'll randomize the intensity of it. So we need to call this initialize. So here's the begin play. So we've got gate spawner. So we'll just add another initialize sandstorm node. Okay, that's good. So now we need to fill out the toggle sandstorm. So we need to go through each of the players, and you remember we've done this quite a few times now. It's this connected players loop. So just drag that, duplicate it, put it up here. To go through each player, and in each player we're going to call the client toggle sandstorm. And now we need to tell it whether to switch the sandstorm on or off and what density. So we'll need to have a Boolean in here to control whether the sandstorm is on or off. So create a new variable and say here is sandstorm on, compile, and set the default to false. So the game starts without the sandstorm on. And the way we're going to toggle it is if we grab our is sandstorm on with control, the moment it's off. So the first time we come into this one, we come into this toggle sandstorm, the sandstorm's off and we want to switch it on. So in order to do that in Boolean logic, you use a not operator, and that reverses Boolean. So it's off to start off with, and we make it true. Plug that in, sandstorm switch, and that will be the same. We're not changing the sandstorm on variable, so that'll be the same for each client. And then once we've gone through each client telling them to switch on the sandstorm, we then want to set the sandstorm at the completed part of this loop. So use Alt, set sandstorm, completed, and we want to feed this sandstorm on not into the set. So what will happen is the first time we call this, it will go through each player and sandstorm will be off. It will set it to on, and then once it's told every client to switch the sandstorm on, it will then set the is sandstorm on. The second time we come through, 5 seconds later, sandstorm will be on, so we'll switch it to off, tell all the clients to switch their sandstorm off, and then set the sandstorm to off as well, and it'll keep toggling between those two. The only other thing we need to do is set fog density. So let's set it to a random. Let's set it to a static value at the moment, and we'll randomize it in a minute. Test this in sort of stages. So I'll make it 0.5. Compile, and now let's switch to 2-player mode so we can see if it synchronizes between more than one player. Press play. Okay, and we're going to wait 5 seconds. And it happened on the server, but not on the client. So for some reason, client one isn't being called. So let's go and see if we can figure out why that is. So we're getting error messages here. So it's saying that set fog density missing. Can't read the property sandstorm fog. Look at this. I think I know what this is. So go back to the player controller. Yeah, and the problem here is that our client toggle sandstorm, we haven't set it to run on the client, so it's trying to run on the server which, as you know, Player Control has a server and a client component. So let's change this one on owning client. Now, because the begin play we checked it was the client version earlier on, then we know the Sandstorm fog exists on the client. So that should now dismiss this. File. Let's try it again. And wait 5 seconds. Fog still isn't rolling in on the client. Let's just check that. Oh, we've called the right function here. Client toggle Sandstorm. I'll save. Sandstorm, right. Compile and save. Save everything. Might just be that it's not saved. And now it's working. So just always make sure that everything's compiled and saved. So now the server and the client are in sync. So the game mode is telling all connected clients to do the same thing at the same time. So every 5 seconds we're getting the sandstorm coming in and then the sandstorm leaving 5 seconds later. So 2 more things I want to do before wrapping up today's episode. First of all, I want to randomize the density of the fog. I don't want it the same every time. And the second thing I want to do is have it happen at random times, not just every 5 seconds. So let's come out of here. This. Right, let's go back to the game mode and expand this a bit more. So we want to set a random density here. Let's pull this out a bit. So let's create a random density. Let me put in random float in range, and I want it anywhere between 0.01 and let's say 0.5 is the maximum, and we'll promote this to a variable. Call this variable density. Connect this. Okay, so we'll have a random sandstorm density each time, and we want to plug this sandstorm density here so that it uses this random amount each time it gets called. All right, let's test this out. So wait for 5 seconds and we'll get a random density. And then when it switches off, it goes back. It looks okay, but there's a subtle little problem, which is that it's setting the density when it switches on and it's setting the density again when it switches off. You probably noticed that time when it switched off, it switched to a higher density before it switched off. So we really only want to set the density when we're switching on and leave it the same when we're switching off. So we need to put in some extra code for that. Do that. A little bit more space beginning. And this time we will do a branch. Based on our is sandstorm on flag. So if the sandstorm is off at the moment, then we're about to switch it on. That's when we want to set the sandstorm density. And if the sandstorm is on at the moment, it means we're about to switch it off. So we'll just go straight to the for loop. So we leave the sandstorm density what it was set to before, so that it will reverse it from the same density part. So that we will compile and test out. Seconds later, there's a very slight fog rolling in, and then you see it rolls out again from the same density. So now more dense the second time round, and it should then reverse from the same density again. Perfect. Okay, so last thing I want to do, actually two things probably, let's here. We want to randomize when this happens. And so what we're going to do now is add in a function, or add in another node that randomizes when it switches on and off. So what we'll do is we'll get a random integer range. Say we want to happen at 1 every 2 times. So we'll get a random integer between 0 and 1, and 2 equals 0, and then just test that. Put a branch in. It's a comparison operator, and if it's true, we'll carry on. What we're saying here is that we'll generate a random number between 0 and 1, and half the time it'll be 0. It'll branch here, and if it's true, it will go on and turn the sandstorm on or off. So we're randomizing the turning on and the turning off of the sandstorm. If you want to randomize just the turning on of the sandstorm, we can do the branch after this, but I'll leave you to play around with that because you might have different ways you want to do it. So now it shouldn't fire every time, it should just fire 50% of the time. So let's go into game after 5 seconds. Okay, it did fire that time. Another 5 seconds. Switched off. This time it didn't fire. And I think that was about 10 seconds between. So you can change that. You might want it to do less frequently. In fact, you might want to change the timer in between. I think in my version of the game, I had the timer event happening every 25 seconds, and then it would decide whether to fire it or not based on that. So you would have anything, every 25 seconds there was an option or a chance of it happening. And this is something we'll use for other features as well in the future. So I'll probably leave it there for this episode. One other thing you might want to do is you might only want this happening when the game is running. In fact, let me show you this before we wrap up. So let's pull all of our nodes here over a bit. And what we want to do is we want to only do this when the game's running. So we've already got a game running variable here. Put in a branch again. First thing we test is the game running? And if it is running, then we then go on and do the rest of the logic. So if the game isn't actually running, we're just going around pre-game, then it's going to stay clear. Probably worth doing. And save, and let's do a final test with all players and see if this works. Players, play. Okay, and let me go to the server. Yeah, at the moment nothing's happening. I'll go into, in fact, sorry, let me just change something else. Instead of every 25 seconds, don't want to make you wait around. Put it back to 5 seconds for testing. Play mode. Go to the server and drive around. And we're not in the game at the moment, so nothing's going to change. There's no risk of any sandstorms happening because the first check in the toggle sandstorm says, is the game running? And if not, don't do anything else. All right. And let's now begin the game. and you see immediately it creates a sandstorm on all 4 clients. I can't even see, in fact there's the gate over there, but you can see it's pretty difficult to see. It adds a little extra dimension to the difficulty of the game. Yeah, now it started again with slightly different density. So, hope you found today's tutorial useful. I'll be back in the next one in a few days, so stay tuned and I'll see you then. Bye for now.